The anomaly appeared on a Tuesday. Not that days of the week mattered much in the deep dark. But the old Earth habits died hard. It was a signal, pristine and impossibly clean. It cut through the background radiation of the cosmos. A single perfect note in a symphony of chaos. It wasn't a plea for help. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was something far stranger, a mathematical proof. Elegant and simple, it solved a problem that had vexed human minds for centuries, a problem we had considered unsolvable. The signal repeated every 103 minutes. Its precision was terrifying. No natural phenomenon could produce such a pattern. This was deliberate. This was intelligent. It was a greeting card from an unknown neighbor, one that casually solved prime number theory. The message was clear, without a single word. We see you. We are more advanced than you can imagine. The entire planet held its breath. Every observatory, every listening post, every star science hub was trained on that one point in the sky. Experts argued and theorized. Was it a gift or a test? They called the source Kepler 18b, a gas giant in a system 400 light-years away. A system with no business hosting life. The signal didn't seem to come from a planet. It came from the empty space beside it. The mathematicians were heroes for a week. They decoded the proof and confirmed its genius. Then the fear began to creep in. What kind of mind sends something like this? What was it trying to prove to us? The signal was a whisper in the void, and it promised something grand or something terrible. You watched the data streams like everyone else, the endless cascade of numbers and projections. You saw the awe in the faces of the world leaders, the barely concealed panic in the military briefings. Humanity had always looked up at the stars. We wondered if we were alone. Now we had our answer. We were not. And our new acquaintances were impossibly brilliant. They understood the universe in ways we could only dream of. The elegant proof was a key. But what door did it unlock? And were we truly ready to see what was on the other side? You are the one they chose. It still felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. You were a linguist, a specialist in dead languages. Now you were humanity's first ambassador. Your job was to understand the incomprehensible, to speak for a species that had just learned it was a child in a very old forest. The ship was named the Starfarer's Promise, a vessel of hope and desperate curiosity. It was the fastest thing humanity had ever built. A needle-thin craft designed to tear a hole in space-time. It would still take you years to reach the signal's origin. The training was relentless. Zero-gravity combat, advanced star science, psychological resilience tests designed to break you. You passed them all. Not with flying colors, but you passed. The captain, a stern woman named Eva Rostova, watched you constantly. Her eyes held a deep skepticism. She was a soldier. She believed in threats and defenses. You believed in words and understanding. This mission would test both philosophies. You were the soft answer to a potentially hard question. Your family said their goodbyes behind thick plasteel glass. Their faces were a mixture of pride and terror. You tried to smile, to reassure them, but the weight of your purpose pressed down on you. You carried the hopes of billions on your shoulders. It was a burden heavy enough to crush a sun. You were supposed to be the bridge between two worlds. A single point of contact for two civilizations. It sounded like a very good way to get stepped on. You had a dark sense of humor. It was your only real armor against the fear. As the ship prepared for its long jump, you looked back. Earth was a perfect blue and white marble, a fragile oasis in an endless desert. You were leaving everything you had ever known, all for a mathematical equation sent by an unknown intelligence. You touched the cool glass of the viewport. A silent promise passed from you to the world below. You would not fail them. You would make them proud. The Starfarer's promise shuddered as its engines engaged. The universe outside folded in on itself. And then, you were gone. The journey was a long silence, a quiet hum of machinery and recycled air. You spent your time studying the signal, trying to glean some deeper meaning from its perfection. Was there a hidden message within the proof? A secondary layer of communication? You ran simulations and cross-referenced every known form of code. Nothing. It was exactly what it appeared to be. A stunning piece of mathematics. It was like receiving a calling card that was also a Nobel Prize. It was incredibly intimidating. Finally, after years that felt like decades, you arrived. The ship dropped out of its faster-than-light travel. It settled into the silent darkness of the Kepler system. The gas giant was a swirling ball of orange and white, majestic and utterly indifferent. But your eyes were not on the planet. They were on the object that floated beside it. The source of the signal. It was a ship. Or something that could only be described as a ship. It was impossibly large. A vessel the size of a small moon. Its hull was the color of obsidian. It absorbed the light of the distant star. There were no lights, no engine signatures, no signs of life whatsoever. It was a ghost in the void, a silent monument to a forgotten power. Your own ship felt like a tiny insect buzzing around a sleeping giant. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Her usual steeliness was gone, replaced by a raw, naked awe. She ordered a full sensor sweep, but the results were baffling. The colossal vessel was old, incredibly old, millions of years old, yet its systems were still drawing a tiny amount of power, enough to send that one repeating signal. You suited up. Your hands trembled slightly as you checked your helmet seals. This was it. The moment of first contact. You and a small team would board the alien ship. The captain argued against it. She called it an unacceptable risk. But you insisted. This was your purpose. You were the linguist, the one meant to understand. How could you do that from a distance? You had to see it up close. You had to breathe its air, if it had any. You had to walk its silent corridors. Reluctantly, she agreed. The small shuttle detached from the Starfarer's promise. It moved slowly toward the colossal unknown. You felt like Jonah approaching the whale. The shuttle docked with a soft hiss. The airlock cycled with surprising ease. The technology was alien, yet strangely intuitive. The inner door slid open, and you took your first step into another world. The air was thin, but breathable. The gravity was slightly higher than Earth's. The corridor was vast. Its ceiling was lost in the shadows above. The walls were made of the same black material as the hull. They seemed to hum with a faint, deep energy. There was no dust, no sign of decay. Just an unnerving, perfect stillness. You found the log room by following the faint power signature. It was not a computer terminal as you would know it. It was a chamber. In the center, a pillar of light pulsed gently. As you approached, it flickered. Images bloomed in the air around you. Holographic ghosts playing out a final, desperate message. You saw them, the creators of this magnificent vessel. They were tall and graceful beings. Their bodies seemed to be made of woven light. You instinctively called them the Elder Ones. The name felt right. It settled into your mind with a sense of ancient truth. The logs showed their civilization, cities of crystal and light, spanning entire continents. They were artists and thinkers, philosophers and gardeners of planets. They had mastered energy and matter. They had explored the furthest reaches of the galaxy. They were everything humanity aspired to be. But the idyllic scenes began to change. A shadow fell over their bright world. The log images grew frantic, desperate. They showed something new, something terrible, an enemy that had appeared at the edge of their territory. The warning was clear, etched in light and sorrow. It showed a foe unlike any other, not ships, not soldiers. It was a swarm, a vast, ravenous cloud of sentient energy. It moved from system to system. Its only purpose was to consume. It didn't conquer planets, it ate stars. The images were horrifying. You watched as sun after sun was drained of its fire. Entire solar systems winked out of existence, leaving behind nothing but cold, dead worlds and the encroaching dark. The Elder Ones had fought back. Their own incredible power was useless against the tide. The swarm simply absorbed their energy weapons. It grew stronger with every attack. This colossal ship, this silent ark, was their last act of defiance. It was not a warship. It was a refugee vessel, a library carrying the last remnants of their knowledge, their final, desperate hope. They had sent it out into the void, a message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean. The mathematical proof was not a boast. It was a filter, a way to ensure that only a species intelligent enough to understand it would find them. A species that might be able to understand their science. A species that might have a chance, however small, against the great devourer. The logs ended with a final, chilling image. The swarm descending upon their home sun. A wave of absolute blackness extinguishing a star. Then, silence. You returned to your ship, your mind reeling. The silent giant outside was not a threat. It was a tomb, a beautiful, tragic tombstone for an entire civilization. The captain listened to your report in grim silence. The awe in her eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard dread. The enemy that had annihilated the Elder Ones was real. And they were out there, somewhere in the infinite dark. Were they coming this way? Had this system been their next target? The questions hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The mission had changed. This was no longer about first contact. It was about survival. Strange things began to happen on the Starfarer's promise. A flicker of movement in your peripheral vision. A shadow that vanished when you turned your head. At first, you dismissed it as stress, the weight of your discovery pressing down on your psyche. But then others started seeing it too. A maintenance tech swore he saw a tall, shimmering figure standing in a Jeffries tube. It was gone before he could get a clear look. The ship's sensors reported nothing. The cameras showed only empty corridors. Yet the feeling persisted. You were not alone on your own ship. The shadows seemed to coalesce in the quiet moments. When the ship was on low power during a long transit, you would see them at the far end of a hallway. A distortion in the air. A brief, impossible silhouette against the bulkhead. They never made a sound. They never interacted with anything. They just watched. The crew's morale began to fray. Nerves were stretched thin. The easy camaraderie of the long voyage was replaced by suspicion and fear. Fights broke out over imagined slights. People were seeing things that weren't there. Or maybe they were. Captain Rostova locked down the ship. She ordered psych evaluations for the entire crew. She was a woman of logic and order. She believed there was a rational explanation. A mass hallucination brought on by a combination of alien pollen from the Ark and extreme psychological pressure. She did not believe in ghosts. But one night, she saw it too. She was alone on the bridge, reviewing stellar cartography charts. A tall, graceful figure of light stood beside her for a single, heart-stopping second. Then it dissolved into nothing. She never spoke of it. But the next day, the look in her eyes had changed. She knew. You realized what was happening. The Elder Ones were not just ghosts in a machine. Their consciousness, or an echo of it, had been imprinted onto the Ark. When you boarded their ship, when you breathed their air, a part of them had attached to you. They were not hostile. They were observers, lost souls drawn to the warmth of living minds. They were the silent witnesses to your struggle, the last remnants of a fallen people, hoping against hope that you would succeed where they had failed. They were the shifting shadows, the quiet reminders of what was at stake. The Elder Ones, as you now called them, were a species of pure thought given form. Their ship was a final, desperate act, a colossal lifeboat cast into the cosmic sea. They fled a foe so absolute it defied their understanding. This vessel was their legacy, a library of all they had ever known. Their culture, their science, their history, all stored within the pulsing heart of the Ark. The mathematical signal was their SOSA call, carefully crafted to attract a mind capable of grasping the danger. They had chosen you, or rather, they had chosen humanity. The creators of the Ark were gone, extinguished. Their consciousness on your ship was just an echo, a faint recording pressed into the fabric of space-time. But their knowledge remained. The Ark was a treasure trove beyond imagination, schematics for devices that could manipulate gravity, formulas that explained the nature of dark energy, and something else, something hidden deep within the archives, a project they had abandoned, a weapon, a theoretical last resort so dangerous, they had never dared to build it themselves. This great devourer, this swarm, was what they called the Star Eaters. It was a terrifyingly simple and efficient form of life, a hive mind of sentient energy. It did not build cities or create art. It had only one directive: consume. It drained the energy from suns, leaving behind cold, barren systems in its wake. It was a plague of cosmic proportions, a blight spreading across the galaxy. The Elder Ones had studied it for centuries. They learned its patterns, its hungers, but they could not find a way to stop it. It was like trying to fight a hurricane with a sword. The Star Eaters were drawn to complex energy signatures, the very thing that powered advanced civilizations. The vibrant output of a thriving star system was a dinner bell for the swarm. The Elder Ones realized too late that their own brilliance had been their undoing. Their shining cities and powerful fleets had called the darkness to them. This was the terrible irony. The cost of their genius was annihilation. They had become the brightest candle in the forest, and they had attracted the moth that would extinguish them. There was a glimmer of hope, buried deep in the Ark's data vaults. It was a research file titled Project Resonance. The Elder Ones had discovered a theoretical weakness in the Star Eaters. The swarm was a hive mind, but it was not a perfect monolith. It was composed of countless individual entities, all linked by a shared consciousness. This link was its greatest strength, and potentially its greatest vulnerability. The Elder Ones had theorized that a specific frequency, a cascade of harmonic resonance, could disrupt this link. The research was incomplete, a desperate theory scribbled at the end of a civilization. They had lacked the time and the resources to test it. The weapon they envisioned was a paradox. It needed a power source immense enough to broadcast the resonance cascade across an entire system. But using such a power source would act as a beacon. It would draw the swarm directly to them. It was a suicide mission. A final, defiant roar against the dying of the light. The Elder Ones had chosen extinction over the risk of failure. They had entombed their research and fled. But they had left it for you. They had left the plans, the theories, the desperate hope. The weapon was a possibility, a whisper of a chance in an ocean of despair. It would require a fusion of technologies, the brute force power generation of humanity, combined with the subtle, elegant wave manipulation of the Elder Ones. Your ship, the Starfarer's promise, had a new purpose. It was no longer an explorer. It was a workshop, a forge in the darkness. You had to build the impossible. You had to finish the work of a dead civilization. The promise was forged in the engine room of your ship. The crew worked in shifts, their faces grim with determination. The fear of the shadows had been replaced by the fear of the swarm, a more tangible and far more deadly threat. You were no longer just a linguist. You were a translator of alien science. You worked with the engineers, deciphering the elegant, complex schematics of the Elder Ones. You bridged the gap between their theoretical physics and your practical mechanics. It was a monumental task. The weapon began to take shape. It was not a gun or a missile. It was an antenna, a massive, intricate array designed to be mounted on the ship's bow. It would draw power directly from the ship's core, a dangerous and unstable process. The engineers warned that it could tear the ship apart. But there was no other choice. You needed the power of a small star to send a ripple through the swarm's consciousness. It was like trying to build a new kind of bell, one that would ring on a frequency that could shatter a ghost. You cannibalized parts from the alien ark, stripping its silent corridors for the exotic materials you needed. The shimmering figures of the Elder Ones watched you. Their silent presence was a constant reminder of the stakes. They did not interfere. They only observed. Were they judging you? Or were they hoping for you? You felt a strange connection to them, a sense of shared purpose across the gulf of extinction. You were finishing their last song. It had to be perfect. You even found a use for the ship's ridiculously oversized coffee machine. Its power converter was perfect for a secondary system. A little humor in the dark. The crew found a new unity. The petty squabbles and tensions disappeared, replaced by a shared, desperate focus. They worked together seamlessly, human hands and alien designs, forging a new hope in the cold void. The weapon was a testament to this new alliance, a bond between a living species and a dead one, a promise made in the face of absolute darkness. You looked at the strange, beautiful device growing on the front of your ship. It was either your salvation or your tombstone. There would be no in-between. Captain Rostova called you to the bridge. Her face was etched with worry. The captain was a soldier. She understood weapons, and the thing you were building terrified her. It was not the potential explosion that scared her most. It was the unknown. The sheer, unpredictable power you were about to unleash. She pointed to the holographic display. It showed energy simulations of the resonance cascade. The models were unstable. They flickered between success and catastrophic failure. There was no middle ground. I have run the numbers 100 times, she said. Her voice was low and steady, but you could hear the strain beneath it. 51 of those simulations end with the weapon creating a microscopic black hole. She paused, letting the words sink in. It would not just destroy the swarm. It would swallow this entire system. United States. The Ark. Everything. The fear was a cold presence in the room. A logical and entirely justified fear. You were playing with cosmic fire. And you didn't have a fire extinguisher. You tried to reassure her. You pointed to your own calculations, the ones that incorporated the more subtle, more esoteric elements of the Elder One's science. Their physics works differently, you explained. It's not just about power. It's about harmony, about finding the perfect note to disrupt their song. The captain was not convinced. She was a woman of tangible proof and hard data. Your talk of harmony sounded like poetry to her, and poetry did not win wars. Her doubts began to spread through the senior crew. The chief engineer expressed his own concerns. The ship's core was not designed for this kind of power draw. It was like attaching a rocket engine to a horse cart. The containment fields might fail, he warned. If that happens, we'll become our own little supernova. The weight of their fear was a heavy burden. They were looking to you for certainty, for a guarantee that this would work. But you couldn't give them one. You were operating on faith. Faith in a dead species and their desperate, final theory. It was a hard thing to ask of soldiers and engineers. You stood before the assembled crew in the main cargo bay. The untested weapon loomed behind you, a strange alien sculpture of hope and fear. Their faces were turned to you, a sea of doubt and exhaustion. The captain's concerns had filtered down. Morale was at an all-time low. They needed a reason to believe again, a reason to risk everything on a ghost's equation. You took a deep breath. You were not a commander. You were not a politician. But you were the one who had spoken with the past. I know you are scared, you began. Your voice echoed in the cavernous space. I am scared too. We are about to fire a weapon we do not fully understand. We are facing an enemy that devoured one of the greatest civilizations this galaxy has ever known. You let the stark truth hang in the air. You would not insult them with false optimism. The Elder Ones were brilliant. They were powerful, and they were destroyed. You paused, meeting the eyes of the crew members one by one. But they left us a gift, you continued, your voice growing stronger. They did not leave us a perfect weapon. They left us a question, a challenge. They showed us the lock, and they gave us a key that they were too afraid to turn. You pointed to the resonance array. That is not just a machine. It is a promise we made the moment we chose to come here. A promise to stand against the darkness, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we left behind on that small blue world. Look around you, you urged. We are a crew of scientists, engineers, soldiers. We are the best humanity has to offer. We have bonded our technology with theirs, our courage with their knowledge. The Elder Ones couldn't do this alone. But we are not alone. We have their legacy, and we have each other. You looked towards the silent shadows that you knew were watching. We are the Starfarer's promise, and we do not break our word. We will face the night, and we will burn so brightly it will be forced to look away. A quiet determination began to replace the fear on their faces. They remembered who they were and what they were fighting for. It came sooner than you expected. A sudden jarring alarm from the bridge. The long-range sensors were screaming. A distortion in space-time, a massive one, at the edge of the system. It was not a ship. It was a wave, a tide of utter blackness rolling in. The Star Eaters had arrived. They were more vast than the holographic logs had shown, a continent of living darkness. It blotted out the distant stars as it moved, a hole in the reality of the night sky. The crew scrambled to their stations. The newfound unity was immediately put to the test. There was no panic, only a grim, focused energy. Captain Rostova's voice was cold iron over the intercom. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Her doubts about the weapon were now irrelevant. It was all they had, the only shield against the coming storm. You raced to the auxiliary bridge, the small command center that had been built around the weapon's controls. This was your burden to bear. You were the one who had to pilot it. The swarm did not have a vanguard. It did not send scouts. Its entire mass moved as one, a single colossal entity driven by an ancient hunger. It ignored your ship. It ignored the silent arc of the Elder Ones. Its attention was fixed on the system's sun, a bright, juicy meal waiting to be consumed. You could feel a strange pressure in your mind, a faint psychic hum from the hive mind. It was not hostile. It was not even aware of you in a meaningful way. You were an ant in the path of a tidal wave, an insignificant speck. The plan was simple and insane. You had to let the swarm get close. The resonance weapon had a limited range. You needed to fire it when the core of the hive mind was within reach. The core, the central consciousness that held the countless entities together. Hitting it was the only way to create the cascade effect. It meant waiting until the last possible second. It meant letting the all-consuming darkness wash over you. The ultimate game of chicken with a cosmic horror. The ship groaned as you diverted all power to the weapon. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the red glow of the emergency alerts. The great devourer was here, and dinner was about to be served. This was the final stand, the culmination of your long journey. You sat in the pilot's seat, your hands gripping the controls of the resonance weapon. The main view screen showed the approaching swarm. It no longer looked like a cloud. It looked like a wall, an infinite, moving wall of nothingness that filled the entire universe. Your ship was a tiny island in an ocean of oblivion. The star at the center of the system began to dim. The swarm was already beginning to feed. Tendrils of darkness reached out, siphoning its energy, its light, its life. "They're ignoring us," the captain's voice said in your ear. "They're focused on the star. This is our only chance." You had to fly the Starfarer's promise directly into the heart of that living nightmare. The weapon was charged. The core was overloaded to a point that made the engineers physically sick. You had one shot. If you missed the core of the hive mind, or if the weapon failed, you would be consumed along with everything else. No pressure. You even managed a weak smile at the thought. Your dark humor was still intact, a small, final act of defiance. "Taking us in," you said. Your voice was calmer than you felt. You pushed the thrusters forward. The ship lurched, protesting the insane maneuver. You flew towards the wall of black. The small vessel plunged into the outer layers of the swarm. It was like flying through static. Strange energy currents buffeted the ship. The psychic hum grew into a deafening roar in your mind. It was a chorus of 1,000,000,000 hungry voices, all singing the same terrible song of consumption. You were inside the beast. You flew on instinct, guided by the faint energy readings from the Elder One's science. You were looking for a needle in a haystack made of shadows, a single point of Ningju concentration in the swirling chaos. Then you saw it, a place where the darkness was even darker, a knot of energy that pulsed with unimaginable power. The core, the heart of the Star Eaters. "I have a target," you yelled into the comms. "It's now or never." You armed the weapon. A final, terrifying wail echoed from the ship's power core. You closed your eyes and pressed the trigger. The weapon activated. Not with a bang, but with a chime. A single, perfect note that cut through the psychic roar of the swarm. For a moment, nothing happened. A terrible, sinking feeling filled your chest. Had it failed? Had you doomed them all? Then, a flash. A blinding, silent flash of pure white light erupted from the antenna on your ship. It was not a destructive blast. It was a wave of pure resonance. A wave of harmony in a sea of discord. The light expanded outwards. It did not burn or destroy. It passed through the swarm like a ripple in a pond. And where it passed, the darkness wavered. The billion-voiced song of the hive mind faltered. The individual entities within the swarm, suddenly severed from the central consciousness, reeled in confusion. They were no longer a single organism. They were a panicked mob, lost and alone in the dark. The cascade had worked. The resonance frequency had shattered their unity. The effect was catastrophic for the swarm. Without the hive mind to guide them, they began to turn on each other, consuming their nearest neighbor in a frantic, mindless hunger. The colossal form of the Star Eaters began to tear itself apart from the inside. A chain reaction of self-destruction. It was a horrifying and beautiful sight. The great devourer was eating itself. The blinding flash was followed by countless smaller flashes, echoes of light as the energy entities annihilated each other. The psychic roar in your mind was replaced by a final, fading scream of a billion dying voices. Then silence. A profound and absolute silence. You drifted alone. The Starfarer's promise was dead in the water, its power core utterly drained. The lights were out. The life support was running on its last emergency reserves. But you were alive. Outside the viewport, the darkness was gone. The stars had returned, brighter and sharper than before. The system's sun, though weakened and scarred, still burned. The swarm was gone, vanquished. The echoes of light from its self-destruction had faded, leaving behind only a deep and profound quiet. The crew was celebrating. Shouts of joy and relief echoed through the powerless corridors. They had done it. They had faced extinction and won. You felt a quiet sense of pride, but also a deep and overwhelming exhaustion. You had stared into the abyss, and you had survived. But the cost was high. Your ship was crippled. You were stranded hundreds of light years from home, a tiny, fragile speck in a vast and now silent universe. The future was an unknown territory, a blank map waiting to be written. As you floated in the aftermath, a new signal appeared on the one working console. It was not the mathematical proof of the Elder Ones. This was something different. It was a simple message, composed not of numbers, but of pure, grateful emotion. A feeling of immense relief and profound thanks washed over you. It was coming from the direction of the galactic core, from a place far beyond the reach of human sensors. The signal was a whisper across an unimaginable distance. From the grateful and very much alive Elder Ones. They had received the echo of your victory. You were not as alone as you thought. A new promise had been made. A new journey was about to begin.